The electromagnetic storm hit without warning, turning Marcus Kane's routine cargo run into a fight for survival. His ship, the Wayward Star, bucked and twisted through space as lightning the color of dying suns lashed across the hull. The navigation systems failed first, then life support began fluctuating, and finally the artificial gravity gave out entirely. "Come on, old girl," Kane muttered, fighting the controls as warning klaxons screamed around him. "Just hold together a little longer." The ship didn't listen. With a grinding shriek of tortured metal, the Wayward Star plowed into the atmosphere of an uncharted world, her heat shields glowing white-hot as she carved a blazing trail across alien skies. Kane managed to cushion the crash landing just enough to avoid immediate death, but the impact drove him into unconsciousness. When he came to, emergency lighting bathed the twisted wreckage in hellish red, and something was beeping insistently in the cargo bay. "Structural integrity compromised," the ship's AI announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Life support failing. Estimated breathable atmosphere remaining, 4 hours, 23 minutes. Kane pulled himself upright, cataloging injuries, nothing broken, but plenty of cuts and bruises that would hurt tomorrow if he lived to see it. The beeping was coming from his cargo manifest scanner, indicating that something in the bay was still giving off life signs. "Impossible," he said aloud, then remembered that he'd been transporting medical supplies to the Kepler colonies. Maybe some of the biomonitors had survived the crash. He made his way through the tilted corridors to the cargo bay, where the scene was chaos. Containers had broken loose during the crash, spilling their contents across the deck. But there, beneath a fallen support beam, something was moving. Not something. Someone. Kane knelt beside the wreckage, clearing debris with increasingly frantic movements. A small hand emerged, then an arm covered in what appeared to be luminescent skin that pulsed with a soft blue-green glow. As he worked to free the trapped figure, he caught sight of large violet eyes and a face that was unmistakably not human. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm as he assessed the situation. The alien, a girl, he thought, though it was hard to be sure, was conscious but clearly injured. A piece of twisted metal had pinned her leg, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. She said something in a language like wind chimes mixed with water over stones, her eyes locked on his face with desperate intensity. "I don't understand, but I'm going to get you out of here," Kane said, positioning himself to lift the beam. "This might hurt." The girl, she couldn't be more than 4 feet tall, with delicate features and silver hair that seemed to move with a life of its own, nodded as if she understood his tone if not his words. Kane braced himself and lifted. The beam was heavier than expected, twisted by the crash into an awkward shape that made leverage nearly impossible. His muscles screamed in protest, but he managed to raise it just high enough for the girl to pull her leg free. She immediately tried to stand, then collapsed with a cry of pain. Her leg was definitely broken. "Okay, new plan," Kane said, looking around the devastated cargo bay. "We need to get you somewhere safer and see what we can do about that leg." The ship's AI helpfully announced that life support would fail in 3 hours and 51 minutes. Kane fashioned a makeshift stretcher from cargo netting and debris, then carefully lifted the alien girl onto it. She was surprisingly light, her luminescent skin warm to the touch. As he carried her toward what remained of his quarters, she reached up and touched his face with one small hand, saying something that sounded like, "Kethma." "I'm Kane," he said, pointing to himself. "Kane." "Kane," she repeated carefully, then pointed to herself. "Lisa. Lisa. Pretty name." Kane managed to smile despite their desperate situation. "Well, Lisa, let's see if we can keep each other alive long enough for someone to find us." His quarters were in better shape than the cargo bay, with functioning emergency power and intact atmosphere seals. Kane set up a basic medical station using supplies from his emergency kit, wishing he had more than basic first aid training. Lisa watched him work with obvious fascination, occasionally offering what appeared to be suggestions in her musical language. When Kane struggled to improvise a splint for her leg, she gestured toward a piece of twisted metal, then made motions that clearly indicated, bend it this way. You're an engineer too? Kane asked as he followed her suggestions. The improvised splint worked better than his original attempt. Lisa smiled, the first time he'd seen her do so, and said something that might have been agreement. Over the next hour, they established a routine of sorts. Kane rationed their water and emergency food supplies while Lisa tried to teach him words in her language. She seemed particularly amused by his attempts to pronounce water, which in her tongue sounded like singing. Life support failing, the AI announced. 2 hours, 15 minutes remaining. Kane tried not to let his growing desperation show. Their distress beacon was broadcasting, but they were in uncharted space. The chances of rescue were minimal. Lisa must have sensed his mood, because she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, comforting in a way that transcended language barriers. "Kani," she said softly, then spoke several sentences in her own language, her tone serious and grateful. "You don't need to thank me," Kane said, understanding her meaning if not her words. Anyone would have done the same thing. Lisa shook her head firmly and repeated the same phrase, this time with added emphasis. Whatever she was saying, it was important to her. The second day was harder. Kane's emergency supplies were running low, and Lisa's condition was worsening despite his improvised medical care. Her luminescent skin had dimmed, and she spent most of her time sleeping. When she was awake, she continued trying to teach him her language, but with increasing urgency. Kane got the impression she was trying to tell him something specific, something she considered vital. "Kethma," she said repeatedly, touching first his chest, then her own. "Kethma Kani Lisa." On the third day, when Kane was beginning to think their distress beacon might go unanswered forever, Lisa suddenly grabbed his arm and pointed toward the ceiling, speaking rapidly in an excited whisper. Kane listened, and heard it, the distant thunder of approaching engines. "Rescue ship," he said, relief flooding through him. "We're going to make it, Lisa." But instead of relief, Lisa's expression showed something that looked almost like fear. She clutched his hand tightly, speaking urgently in her musical language while tears streamed down her luminescent cheeks. Kane didn't understand the words, but the emotion was clear. Whatever was coming to get them, Lisa was afraid it meant they would be separated. "It's okay," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." Lisa's grip tightened, and she whispered that same phrase again, "Kethma Kaini Lisa." Kane had no idea what it meant, but he had a feeling he was about to find out. 3 weeks aboard the rescue vessel Meridian had given Kane time to heal from his injuries and learn disturbing details about Lisa's situation. The universal translator finally allowed them to communicate properly, though some concepts seemed to resist direct translation. "Your people," Kane said, sitting beside Lisa in the medical bay where she'd refused to be moved despite the doctor's insistence she was fully recovered. "Tell me about them." Lisa's violet eyes grew distant. "The Caliph are wanderers, Kane. We follow the star songs across the galaxy, living in harmony with the natural forces of space itself." She gestured toward the viewport where stars streamed past. "My father is Thyron, chieftain of the Silver Wind clan. I was traveling with our trade delegation when raiders attacked. And you were the only survivor. The others fought bravely, but raiders use weapons that corrupt the spirit as well as destroying the body. They took me to sell to collectors who prize exotic slaves." Lisa's luminescent skin dimmed with the memory. "They left me in your cargo bay to die when your ship began transmitting distress signals they couldn't silence." Kane felt a familiar surge of anger at what she'd endured. "How long were you captive?" 67 days. "Long enough to lose hope that my people would find me." She looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complex. "Until you chose to save a stranger's life instead of preserving your own resources. Anyone would have." "No." Lisa's interruption was gentle but firm. The raiders who held me demonstrated daily that most beings prioritize their own survival above the welfare of others. What you did was extraordinary by any measure. Cain was uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what felt right. Yes. Which is why the Kethma bond formed between us. There was that phrase again. Cain had heard Lisa use it multiple times, always with reverence, but the translator seemed unable to render it into standard. What exactly is Kethma? Lisa was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to explain. Your language has no equivalent concept. The closest translation might be soul bond or life debt, but those terms miss the spiritual significance. Try me. When someone saves another's life through genuine self-sacrifice, our people believe their spirits become intertwined. The person saved becomes spiritually responsible to their rescuer, but the rescuer also becomes responsible for the welfare of the saved. Lisa's skin pulsed with soft light as she spoke. It creates a bond deeper than family, stronger than marriage contracts. Cain felt a chill. And you think this bond formed between us? I don't think it, Cain. I know it. I can feel your emotional state as if it were my own. When you're worried, my skin dims. When you're content, I feel peaceful. She reached for his hand. Can't you feel it too? Honestly, Cain could. He'd been attributing the connection to shared trauma, but there had been moments over the past weeks when he'd known Lisa was distressed before seeing any outward signs. Moments when her mood seemed to influence his own in ways that defied explanation. So what does this mean, practically speaking? It means that according to Caliph law, I now belong to your clan until the debt is resolved through reciprocal life-saving or formal ritual transfer. Lisa's expression grew troubled. The problem is, humans don't have clans. No, we don't. Cain was beginning to understand Lisa's earlier fears about rescue. What happens when your people find us? I don't know. This situation has never occurred before in our recorded history. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's intercom crackled to life. All passengers and crew to emergency stations. We have multiple contacts approaching at high velocity. Unknown vessels, but they're trying to communicate. Cain and Lisa exchanged glances. My father, Lisa whispered, her grip on Cain's hand tightening. He's found me. They made their way to the observation deck, where a crowd had gathered to watch the approaching vessels. Cain's breath caught at his first sight of Caliph's ships. They didn't look built so much as grown, their hulls flowing in organic curves that seemed to pulse with the same bioluminescent patterns as Lisa's skin. Beautiful, he murmured. And dangerous, Lisa added quietly. Caliph biotechnology is far advanced beyond most species' understanding. Those ships could disable the meridian without effort if they chose to. The lead vessel extended what appeared to be a docking umbilical, a living tube that connected to the meridian's airlock with disturbing efficiency. Within minutes, a delegation of Caliph had boarded, led by a figure whose commanding presence left no doubt about his identity. Chieftain Nyron was nearly 7 feet tall, his silver hair flowing like liquid metal around shoulders that bore intricate scarification patterns. His violet eyes, so like Lisa's, swept the assembled humans with regal disdain until they found his daughter. Lisa Teal, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Cain's chest. Lisa stepped forward, but kept hold of Cain's hand. She spoke rapidly in her native language, gesturing between Cain and herself while her father's expression grew increasingly severe. The universal translator struggled with the rapid-fire exchange, providing only fragments: saved life, Kethma bond, human doesn't understand, no clan structure, unprecedented situation. Finally, Byron turned his attention to Cain. When he spoke, the translator managed to keep up. Human Cain, my daughter tells me you preserved her life at risk to your own. I did what anyone would do. You did what a warrior of honor would do. However, your actions have created a complex situation. Thyron's gaze was measuring, analytical. By saving Lisa's life, you have claimed spiritual responsibility for her continued welfare. Do you understand what this means? Cain looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. I'm beginning to. It means, human Cain, that whether you intended it or not, you have made my daughter a member of your clan. Which means you must now deal with the consequences of that claiming. What consequences? Thyron's smile was sharp, predatory. It means, young warrior, that you now belong to us. The silence that followed was profound. Cain felt every human eye in the observation deck turn toward him, while the Caliph delegation watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement. Lisa squeezed his hand. I tried to warn you, she whispered. The Kethma bond works both ways. Cain looked at Thyron, then at Lisa, then at the assembled crowd of humans and aliens who were all waiting to see what he would do. Well, he said finally, this should be interesting. Lisa's soft laughter carried harmonics he was beginning to recognize as pure joy. The conference room aboard the Meridian had never hosted a diplomatic crisis quite like this one. Cain sat at the table surrounded by human officials, Caliph warriors, and enough translation equipment to supply a small embassy, while everyone tried to figure out exactly what kind of legal and cultural mess he'd stumbled into. Let me see if I understand this correctly, said Captain Morrison, the Meridian's commanding officer. Mr. Cain saved your daughter's life, which according to your customs creates some kind of spiritual bond. The Kethma bond is not some kind of spiritual connection, replied Thyron with barely concealed irritation. It is the most sacred relationship possible between our people, superseding even blood kinship. And because of this bond, Cain now owns your daughter. Lisa made a sound of protest. No one owns anyone, Captain. The bond creates mutual responsibility. Cain became responsible for my welfare when he saved my life, but I also became responsible for his spiritual well-being. Which means, prompted Dr. Reyes, the ship's xenocultural specialist. Which means, Thyron said, that my daughter now belongs to Cain's clan, and he belongs to ours. It's a reciprocal relationship. Cain rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. But humans don't have clans. How can I belong to something that doesn't exist? That, said Thyron with grim satisfaction, is exactly the problem. The argument that followed involved increasingly creative attempts to translate concepts that had no equivalent between species. The universal translator began producing phrases like spiritual kinship obligation group and honor-bound family unit collective in place of the Caliph word for clan. This is ridiculous, Cain said finally. Can't we just declare the bond null and void due to cultural incompatibility? The silence that followed was so profound Cain could hear the ship's life support systems humming. Cain, Lisa said gently, that would be like asking me to declare that my rescue never happened. The Kethma bond isn't a contract to be dissolved, it's a spiritual reality. Dissolving the bond would be considered a grave insult to our people, added Thyron, and could have serious diplomatic consequences for human-Caliph relations. Captain Morrison leaned forward. What kind of consequences? The kind where my people might decide that humans lack the honor necessary for continued peaceful contact, Thyron replied flatly. Great, Cain muttered. So I accidentally started an interstellar incident by pulling someone out from under a beam. You started an opportunity, corrected an older Caliph warrior Cain hadn't been introduced to. I am Kethtar, Thyron's advisor. In our history, no outsider has ever been granted clan membership. You could be the first. What would that involve? Kethtar and Thyron exchanged glances. Trials, Thyron said finally. Tests to determine if you possess the qualities necessary for Caliph kinship. What kind of tests? Tests of courage, wisdom, and spiritual connection to the natural forces of the universe, Lisa explained. The same trials our own young people undergo to achieve full adult status in the clan. Cain looked around the conference room at the expectant faces, human officials hoping he wouldn't create a diplomatic crisis, Caliph warriors evaluating his worthiness, and Lisa watching him with an expression of hope and fear. And if I fail these trials? Then the bond cannot be properly integrated into our clan structure, Byron said. Lisa would be uncategorizable. Neither fully Caliph nor properly bonded to a recognized clan. She'd be exiled. Worse. She'd be spiritually adrift, belonging fully to neither world. Thyron's expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. I cannot allow that to happen to her. Cain felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He hadn't just saved Lisa's life, he'd inadvertently made himself responsible for her entire future. What if I pass the trials? Then you become the first human member of a Caliph clan, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, Keftar said. Including the right to speak for your people in certain diplomatic contexts. Captain Morrison's eyebrows rose. That could actually be advantageous for human-Caliph relations. Assuming he doesn't get himself killed in the process, Dr. Reyes added helpfully. Cain looked at Lisa, who was watching him with those violet eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The connection he'd been trying to ignore pulsed between them, her fear, her hope, her absolute trust that he would make the right choice. These trials, Cain said finally. Are they survivable? Our young people generally manage, Byron replied with what might have been amusement. Though admittedly, they're raised from childhood to understand Caliph's spiritual practices. And I would be improvising as I go. With guidance, Lisa said quickly. I would be permitted to help you understand what's required. Cain was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. He could refuse the trials and potentially doom Lisa to exile, or he could accept tests he didn't understand for membership in a culture he knew nothing about. The decision, when it came, surprised him with its clarity. I'll do it, he said. But I have conditions. Thyron's eyes narrowed. You are hardly in a position to negotiate, human. Actually, I am. If you need me to pass these trials for Lisa's sake, then you need me to have the best possible chance of success. Cain leaned forward. I want full disclosure about what the trials involve. I want Lisa allowed to coach me through the cultural aspects. And I want a guarantee that if I fail, it won't be held against humanity as a whole. And in return, I'll give the trials my best effort, and I'll accept whatever the outcome means for my relationship with your people. Byron considered this for several minutes while the conference room remained silent. Finally, he nodded. Acceptable. We will begin preparations immediately. He stood, the other Caliph following suit. Cain of no clan, in 3 days you will face the trials of binding. Success will make you Cain of the Silver Wind clan. Failure will make me Cain who tried, Cain finished. I can live with that. As the Caliph delegation filed out, Lisa lingered behind, approaching Cain with tears streaming down her luminescent cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did, Cain replied, squeezing her hand gently. The Kethma bond, remember? We're responsible for each other now. Lisa's smile was radiant. Then we'd better make sure you pass these trials. Cain grinned back, despite the magnitude of what he'd just committed to. Any advice on how to spiritually connect with the natural forces of the universe? Start with learning to hear the star songs, Lisa said. Everything else builds from there. Star songs. Right. Cain nodded as if this made perfect sense. This should be interesting. Outside the viewport, the Caliph fleet waited in formation, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing in patterns that looked almost like communication. Cain had the distinct feeling they were talking about him. The main cargo bay of Thyron's flagship had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a meditation chamber and a cosmic observatory. Crystalline formations grew from the walls in spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, while the ceiling displayed a real-time view of the surrounding star field. Cain stood in the center of it all, wearing robes that felt more like living tissue than fabric, while a circle of Caliph elders observed him with expressions ranging from skeptical to openly curious. The first trial is the test of listening, Byron announced, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the crystalline formations. You must demonstrate your ability to hear the star songs that guide our people through the void. Right, Cain said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. And how exactly does one listen to stars? Kethtar stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a musical instrument made from the same living crystal as the room's decorations. Stars sing constantly, human Cain. Their fusion processes create vibrations that echo through space-time itself. Most species cannot perceive these frequencies, but Caliph children learn to hear them before they can walk. Naturally, Cain muttered. Lisa moved to his side, her presence immediately calming despite the impossibility of what he was being asked to do. Close your eyes, she said softly. Don't listen with your ears. Listen with your spirit. Cain closed his eyes and tried to listen with his spirit, whatever that meant. At first, all he heard was the normal background noise of a starship, ventilation systems, power conduits, the subtle vibration of engines maintaining position. But gradually, something else began to emerge. A sound so faint it might have been imagination, like distant music played on instruments made of light itself. I think I hear something, Cain said hesitantly. The assembled Caliph exchanged glances. Several looked genuinely surprised. Describe what you hear, Byron commanded. It's like a choir singing harmony, but the voices are made of starlight. And there's a rhythm underneath it, like a heartbeat, but much slower. Cain kept his eyes closed, afraid that opening them would break the fragile connection. One of the voices is stronger than the others, closer maybe. That would be our son, Lisa whispered, wonder clear in her voice. You're actually hearing it. Cain opened his eyes to find the Caliph elders staring at him with expressions of amazement. In our recorded history, Kethtar said slowly, only 3 non-Caliph have ever demonstrated the ability to perceive star songs on their first attempt. Is that good or bad? It's unprecedented for a human, Byron replied. Which brings us to the second trial. The crystalline formations in the room began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns that created different acoustic properties. The star song changed accordingly, becoming more complex, more layered. The test of harmony, announced another elder Cain hadn't met. You must prove your ability to find your place within the greater song of the universe. This time, Kethtar handed Cain the crystal instrument. It felt warm in his hands, almost alive, responding to his touch with soft chimes that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. I've never played any kind of instrument, Cain protested. This is not about musical skill, Lisa explained. It's about spiritual resonance. Let the instrument feel your connection to the star songs, and it will teach you how to join them. Cain held the crystal formation and tried to let his mind empty of conscious thought. The star songs were still there, that cosmic choir singing in frequencies that bypassed his ears entirely. Tentatively, he touched one of the crystal's projections. The note that emerged was pure, clear, and somehow perfectly harmonized with the celestial music he was hearing. Encouraged, Cain tried another note, then another, finding that the instrument seemed to guide his fingers toward the right frequencies. Within minutes, he was playing a simple melody that wove itself into the star songs like a new voice joining an ancient chorus. The assembled Caliph began to hum along, their voices adding layers of complexity that made Cain's simple tune part of something vast and beautiful. When the music finally faded, the silence was profound. 2 trials passed, Byron said, and Cain could have sworn he heard approval in the chieftain's voice. The 3rd trial remains. The room transformed again, the crystals dimming until only starlight illuminated the space. But now the stars seemed closer, more present, as if the walls had become transparent to reveal the true immensity of space. The test of sacrifice, Byron continued. You must demonstrate your willingness to place the welfare of the clan above your own desires. What does that involve? Instead of answering directly, Byron gestured, and two Caliph warriors entered the chamber carrying what appeared to be a stasis pod. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, Kane could see a young Caliph male, unconscious and obviously injured. "My nephew, Veltar," Byron explained. "He was wounded in the same raider attack that took Lisa. Our healers have done what they can, but his spirit grows weaker each day. Soon, we must choose whether to risk dangerous experimental treatment or allow him to die with honor." Kane felt a chill of premonition. "And this relates to my trial how? The experimental treatment requires a spiritual anchor. Someone willing to share their life force to stabilize the patient during the procedure." Kethtar's expression was grave. "If successful, both patient and anchor survive. If it fails, both die," Kane finished. "Both die," Byron confirmed. "This is your choice, Kane of no clan. Prove your commitment to our people by risking your life for someone you've never met, or refuse and remain forever an outsider." Kane looked at the unconscious Caliph in the stasis pod, then at Lisa, whose expression showed she was torn between hoping he would help her cousin and fearing for his safety. "What are the odds of success?" "Unknown," admitted the healer who had been working on Veltar. "This procedure has never been attempted with a human anchor. Your life force operates on different frequencies than ours. Which could make it more effective or more dangerous?" "Both." Kane was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around him. These people, Lisa's people, were asking him to risk his life for one of their own based on nothing but trust and the slim hope that his alien physiology might provide the key to saving someone who would otherwise die. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. "I'll do it." Lisa gasped. "Kane, you don't understand the risk." "I understand it perfectly." Kane squeezed her hand gently. "This is what the Kethma bond means, isn't it? We're responsible for each other's welfare. That includes your cousin." The procedure that followed was unlike anything in Kane's experience. He lay on a biobed connected to the patient by crystalline conduits that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns as Caliph's skin. As the treatment began, 6 months later, Kane stood on the observation deck of the Silver Wind clan's flagship, watching a human diplomatic vessel approach through the swirling colors of a nebula. The scarification on his arms had healed into intricate patterns that marked him as both clan member and bridge builder, titles that carried more responsibility than he'd ever imagined. "Nervous?" Lisa asked, joining him at the viewport. Her own appearance had changed over the months. She now wore the braided hair ornaments of a cultural liaison, marking her new role as interpreter between human and Caliph societies. "Terrified," Kane admitted. "The Earth Diplomatic Corps wants to establish formal relations with your people, and somehow I became the expert on Caliph culture." "You are an expert on Caliph culture. You've been living it for half a year." Lisa smiled, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with amusement. "Besides, you have advantages no human diplomat could match." "Such as?" "You can hear the star songs now without conscious effort. You understand that our ships aren't just vessels but living extensions of our collective spirit. You know that when Caliph warriors posture aggressively, they're actually showing respect by acknowledging your worthiness as a potential opponent." Kane nodded, remembering his early confusion when Veltar had challenged him to ritual combat as a way of saying, "Thank you for saving my life." The resulting sparring match had left both of them bruised but had cemented their friendship in ways that simple conversation never could have. "The human delegation is requesting permission to dock," announced the ship's bioneural communication system, a living network that Kane had learned to interface with through meditation and bioelectric feedback. "Tell them welcome, and that Kane of the Silver Wind clan awaits them," Thyron's voice responded. The chieftain approached across the observation deck, his ceremonial robes flowing around him like captured starlight. "Are you prepared for this responsibility, my clan son?" The title still made Kane's chest warm with pride. "As prepared as anyone can be for making interstellar diplomatic history." "You've been making history since the day you chose to save Lisa rather than preserve your emergency supplies," Byron pointed out. Today is simply the next chapter. The docking process was complex, requiring the human vessel to interface with Caliph biotechnology that operated on principles Earth science was only beginning to understand. Kane watched through the bioneural network as his former colleague struggled with airlocks that responded to emotional states rather than mechanical controls. I should go help them, Kane said, then paused as he felt a familiar presence through the Kethma bond. Lisa, are you concerned about something? Not concerned, exactly. But this meeting will determine whether humans and Caliph can build lasting friendship or whether our cultures are too different for meaningful cooperation. Her violet eyes reflected the nebula's swirling colors. Your experience suggests the former, but you're exceptional. Kane laughed. 6 months ago, I was a cargo pilot who'd never heard of the Caliph. If I can adapt to your culture, other humans can too. Perhaps. But you had proper motivation. Which was? You had me to teach you, and the Kethma bond to guide you. Most humans won't have those advantages. Kane considered this as he made his way to the docking bay. The human delegation that emerged from their ship looked exactly like he'd expected, professional, slightly overwhelmed, and trying hard to project confidence while surrounded by technology that seemed more grown than built. Ambassador Chen, Kane said, greeting the delegation leader with a formal bow in the Caliph style. Welcome aboard the Song of Silver Winds. Mr. Kane. Ambassador Chen studied Kane's scarified arms and flowing Caliph robes with obvious curiosity. You've adapted well to alien culture. I've found a home among people who value honor, wisdom, and spiritual connection above material accumulation, Kane replied diplomatically. But I understand that adaptation requires time and proper guidance. The formal meetings that followed were complex, involving translation not just of languages but of fundamental concepts. Kane found himself explaining Caliph philosophy to humans while simultaneously helping his clanmates understand human motivations and social structures. Your species values individual achievement above collective harmony, Kethtar observed during a break in negotiations. How do they maintain social cohesion? Through laws, shared values, and enlightened self-interest, Kane explained. Humans can be remarkably cooperative when they understand how cooperation benefits them personally. And if they don't see personal benefit? Then you have to show them the larger picture. Help them understand that some things are worth doing simply because they're right. The breakthrough came during the third day of talks, when Ambassador Chen asked about the scarification patterns on Kane's arms. They're beautiful, she said, studying the intricate designs. But they must have been painful to receive. Very painful, Kane confirmed. But pain shared with clanmates creates bonds that transcend individual discomfort. Every mark tells a story of connection, sacrifice, and mutual responsibility. And you chose this? Voluntarily? Kane looked around the conference room at the assembled Caliph, Byron, Kethtar, Lisa, Veltar, and dozens of others who had become his family through choice rather than birth. I chose belonging, he said simply. I chose to be part of something larger than myself, to accept responsibility for others' welfare in exchange for the security of knowing they would do the same for me. Ambassador Chen was quiet for a long moment. And this is what Caliph society offers. This sense of belonging. To those willing to earn it through service and sacrifice, Byron interjected. Kane proved his worthiness through trials that test spiritual strength as much as physical courage. What kind of trials? Kane smiled. The kind that show you who you really are when everything else is stripped away. The discussions continued for several more days, but Kane could feel the shift in atmosphere. The human delegation stopped seeing the Caliph as exotic aliens to be studied and began recognizing them as potential partners with valuable perspectives to offer. The formal treaty that emerged established frameworks for cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and mutual defense agreements. But the moment Kane treasured most came during the signing ceremony, when Ambassador Chen approached him privately. The Earth government would like to offer you a position as permanent cultural liaison, she said. You'd be the first human ambassador to an alien species. Kane looked through the viewport at the nebula where human and Caliph ships now traveled together in formation, their different technologies creating a harmony of purpose that transcended species boundaries. "Thank you," he said, "but I already have a job." "Which is?" "Bridge builder. Family member. Someone who helps others discover that the universe is big enough for many different ways of belonging." Ambassador Chen smiled. "I think that might be the most important job in the galaxy." That evening, Kane stood once again on the observation deck, watching stars whirl overhead while the ship sang its ancient songs through space. Lisa joined him, as she always did, their bond allowing them to share the profound satisfaction of work well done. "Regrets?" she asked. Kane thought about his old life, the solitary cargo runs, the empty apartment on a space station, the careful distance he'd maintained from meaningful connections. Then he looked at his scarified hands, listened to the star songs that had become as natural as breathing, felt the warmth of belonging to something eternal and beautiful. "None," he said firmly. "Best crash I ever survived." Lisa's laughter harmonized with the ship's binaural chorus, creating music that spoke of friendship transcending species, of families formed through choice rather than genetics, and of the profound truth that sometimes the most important journeys begin with acts of simple kindness. In the distance, human and Caliph vessels continued their joint patrol, protecting trade routes and refugee convoys with the same dedication Kane had once shown to a single trapped alien girl. The Kethma bond, it seemed, was contagious in the best possible way. Kane smiled and settled in to listen to the stars sing songs of connection, belonging, and the endless possibilities that opened when beings chose to care for each other across the vast distances of space. He had found his place in the universe, and it was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by family, building bridges between worlds, and discovering that home was not a place but a choice made daily to belong to something worthy of belonging to. The star songs continued, and Kane sang along, his human voice adding new harmonies to melodies older than civilizations, creating music that spoke of futures where differences became strengths and strangers became family through the simple act of choosing to see each other as worthy of care.